Hi, I'm Melanie.
And I'm Saeed.
And this is Two Writers
Talking Shit. Welcome.
Oh my God.
Oh, man.
So good to see you, Saeed.
So good to see you again.
It's
a lovely experience.
It's always a pleasure.
Yes. Today we have...
Go on.
My manager.
What?
I know, he's right here.
You've only got one. I brought two.
I know you got a pair.
I know.
I got one. And this is my manager, Zack Zucker from Bellevue. Yes.
Welcome, Zack. I felt like that almost needed like a studio audience kind of intro. We like the way that you were teeing it up.
Definitely. Yeah. I appreciate the claps, but I'm the editor put some nice claps.
Okay.
This is great. I feel the chemistry already.
Listen, me and Mel are hilarious together. We decided to do a podcast. How did we meet, Mel?
We met on the Twitter.
We met on Screenwriter Twitter.
Oh, that place.
Mm-hmm.
And that place.
I am familiar.
We'll get into that. Yeah. But also what's funny is, I always tell Mel this, but she doesn't want her credit, which is crazy. But Mel was somebody that I was applying to Nickelodeon. I wrote an Insecure spec. And she read it and she gave me like some notes and a couple cool little dope jokes. So I also feel like, you know, we constantly give each other our work back and forth and shout out shit. So she's always been cool there. So I kind of look at her as part of the reason why I got in Nickelodeon.
Oh, that's so nice.
Okay.
Zach doesn't care.
I know. He's like...
Zach could give less than two shits.
Nickelodeon? No, look.
He's here to talk about himself. Let's get that going.
Well,
you know what I mean?
We can talk about Saeed as well, because Nickelodeon was a very good stepping stone, but 100%. I'm sure we'll get into that.
100%. Okay, we're just going to dive into it, Zach.
Let's do it.
Why does somebody need a manager, a writer?
Yes. So that is a great question. And I think the answer is simply that my job used to be done by agents. And about, give or take, in the 80s, maybe to the 90s, agents basically stopped developing. And this was the era where packaging became a thing. This was the era where, talent agencies went from boutiques to behemoths. And a lot of the day-to-day functions on the literary side kind of went by the wayside. And so that was the era where the first generation of literary managers kind of came up and really filled that void. And so I think as now we flash forward 25 years or so to the present day, I think there's a pretty good balance that's been attained between agents and managers in terms of, I look at it as a Venn diagram, right? Where the agents will oftentimes handle the business side, in TV, the staffing side. The managers will handle the creative side, the development side, and then the overlap comes from the networking, the branding, the evangelizing for the clients. And that's not to say that it's black and white, right? There's always overlap. I'm staffing, agents sometimes have good notes, but generally speaking, that's where the breakdown happens. And so in another context, I'm more of like the day-to-day person, whereas the agents are more the transactional person when there's a deal on the table or a job to go after or something like that. But ultimately, we work in harmony.
I agree. It's interesting. So what I will say is, I'll give you a perfect example. That's a great answer, but I'm going to break it down to the dumbest fact, which is, I remember I came out of UCLA with a pilot's flip, right? About a 50-year-old pimp.
I know it well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I queried, Zach read the query. I give him that too, which is tight because I queried managers. Zach got the query, reached out, sent them the script. Now, here's something that he did, which was super smart, that helped my project, right? So I had Flip. It had a different ending, right? And Zach was like, this is the end of your season, not the end of the pilot. Which is super fucking smart because I think sometimes writers will be like entering contests and you placing in contests and shit and you think this script is it. But it is a difference between contests and getting staffed or having development meetings and all this type of shit. And he was the one who was like, yeah, you need a different ending, which was a dope note because it was true. Because it was like, oh shit, that is the end of the season. That is not the end of the pilot. And so that's that was dope.
So wait, do we want to talk about how you and Zach met? The famous query letter?
You can.
Why you decided to sign him? Why you decided to sign with Zach?
Yeah, so on my end, I read the query letter. I thought what was really interesting and stood out to me, first of all, was very professionally written. Second of all, I think the fact that Saeed had life experience, had work experience, to be fair, in a career that I thought was very interesting, that stood out.
The rap career?
Yeah, that one. Yeah. That one. And also I think he did something very smart, which is, I believe you gave me a ticking clock. You said, I'm going to be in LA for a week.
Yeah.
If you want to meet, great. Let's do it while I'm in town. And that got me to read the script quickly.
Which you did.
And I did, and I really enjoyed it. And then, talking with you, I think, we'll get into this later on as well, but personality is such a big factor. Clearly, if you guys are listening to this podcast, you got a great personality. But no, I think it is part of the equation when you're looking to determine whether or not you want to sign someone, right? Of course, it's what's on the page. Another component is personality in the room. And then the third component is hustle, grind, trying to find people who you feel are willing to do the work. And I think in our initial meeting, it was very clear that you were someone who kind of checked all those boxes. And I think we just got along really well. So on my side, that's what really drew me in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I had heard about Bellevue, you know what I'm saying? Just being a screenwriter through Twitter, like Bellevue has scripts on the blacklist, and I was like, all right, this is one of the places. But then when I met Zack, it's interesting because Zack started as a junior manager, which was dope because we kind of like rose together in a sense, like, you know what I'm saying? And when I met with him, he was cool. I felt like he got what I was trying to do. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like he was trying to change my shit or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, all his notes, the notes he had were more about that piece. It wasn't like, hey, I think you should write this, or I don't think you should write about these kind of characters, blah, blah, blah. And he got my vibe and what I was trying to do. And so to me, it made sense.
Now, like, how many query letters are you getting? And then what percentage of those are you opening? And then what percentage of the ones that you open do you respond to?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot. I will say I get
more now.
A lot more.
Yeah.
I get some on Twitter. To be honest, I don't look at those. I don't really, if anyone's like trying to DM me, I don't really respond to that. I get a lot of query letters through email. I try to read every one of them.
Oh.
I try to read every one that has a log line. There's one exception, which is if I see that there's a PDF attached to it, I automatically have to delete it for liability purposes. Because we're not allowed, and I think the same is true for pretty much anyone across the board on the representation side or producer side. You're really not reading unsolicited material unless you get a signed release. Right. And so I think it's a mistake a lot of writers make. I mean, not everybody, but maybe like 10% of the query letters I get, I just have to delete right out of the gate. But for the rest, I'm certainly trying to read them and be thoughtful and, consider. But at the same time, to answer your question directly, I'm getting like dozens every week, and it's just impossible for me to respond to all of them. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just trying to find, mostly the log line. I would say maybe like 2/3 log line, 1/3 everything else, right? Is it professionally written? What's the writer's background? There's a certain percentage of query letters I get where there's nothing about the writer, and it's just, hey, here's the script. Do you want to read it? And the answer is always no for me, because I don't rep projects, I rep people, right? So I also have to know, who are you that's reaching out to me? And so ultimately I would say, I don't know, maybe I respond to about, give or take, 5% of them. But like in a world where I'm getting, dozens every week, I'm probably responding to a couple every week. Yeah.
That's a lot. I think a couple a week is a lot. That's a really good reminder or note for like any writers out there, that anytime you're emailing a rep that you're not represented by, or a producer or a showrunner, like to not just attach your script if it hasn't been requested, like to only ever attach your script if the person you're sending to has
requested it,
specifically requested it. Otherwise it's like, be like, would you like to read my sample, or here's the log line, but like, that's it.
Right. And I think on the flip side, some writers take that too far to the other end, where they're a little bit bashful and the query letter won't have any log lines on it. And they'll just say, hey, I'm a writer. Can I query you? Which, that's what this is.
In my inbox, bro.
Yeah.
What is this?
That's what this is, man. I'm not gonna respond to you saying yes. Like this is the query, So I would say my advice to writers when they're querying is, include a log line. Don't include 10. Include one or two at most, right? And also do a little bit of research ahead of time, right? Know who you're querying. Like, it shouldn't just be the exact same letter copied and pasted, 30 times, right? Do a little bit of research. Say, oh, I know you work for Bellevue or Management 360 or whoever it is, right? And I saw you rep this person. I love the show that they wrote on or whatever, right? Just find something so that we know, oh, you're not just querying everyone in town. You're being considerate of me and thinking this might be a match, right? Look, if you have the greatest log line ever, great, that'll work for you. But short of that, do a little bit of homework and just give yourself the best chance possible, right? To make it like anything else in life, right? It's about forming that personal connection.
So for upcoming writers, which this podcast is about, like, what are some things they can do to get a manager's attention? Obviously querying is one, but what are some things you think they should be doing that you pay attention to?
Yeah, I think querying is effective. Not everyone responds. I will say I do, my colleagues at Bellevue do, other managers do, agents probably not so much, producers probably not so much, maybe some junior executives, some assistants, but I think you really want to supplement that with, contests, but not all the contests, and we can get into that a little bit more, but you at least want to play in that game because it is a window to get read. Networking, right? Just being in LA. I mean, not to say you have to live in LA necessarily. Obviously these days, especially post-COVID, right? A lot of stuff is done over Zoom, over Twitter, what have you, but just trying to do your best to be an active participant in the community, right? If you're in LA, network, set drinks with assistants, try to get any on-set experience you can, right? Like, obviously being a writer's or a showrunner's assistant is great. It's hard to get those jobs. So maybe start as a PA, start as an intern, right? Just getting on-set experience can be helpful. If you're not in LA, utilize the internet. It's a little bit harder, but these days it can be done, and I'm sure, Saeed, you've talked on this podcast, and I'm sure we can talk about how effective you were at, communicating with people on Twitter, forming those relationships, right? Which can then translate into getting script reads, getting meetings, So yeah, I think networking is a very important part of this. There are, certain coverage services and script hosting services that can be effective. I like the Blacklist. I like Coverfly, and there's a few different businesses that are in that same umbrella at the company level. There are Roadmap and other services. I think we can get into that as well. I think there are ways to use those services more efficiently. There's also ways to throw a lot of money at contests and services and not have a lot of results. So we can talk about what gives you the best chance, right, of getting the most bang for your buck there. But those are avenues where representatives and some producers are paying attention. And then, I think the last piece of the puzzle is being very knowledgeable about, let me reframe, as knowledgeable as you can be as an outsider of what's actually working in the marketplace, right? What's selling, what are people interested in, right? You're never going to know 100% of the intel. I mean, that's what I do, right? Yeah. And that's what agents do. Like, part of our job is to be experts in that space, but you can read the trades, right? You can look at the annual Blacklist. You can,
Deadline,
of course, track the box office, track, the Oscars, right? And the Emmys, know what shows are being sold and picked up. Exactly. You should be reading Deadline every day. You should be following, Hollywood Reporter and Variety and Vulture and, Collider and like those types of entertainment industry websites, because what it will do over time, in combination with tracking what specs are selling, what's working, in the TV ratings or at the box office, right? You can start to piece together what types of genres and ideas people are more inclined to respond to, right? Because they're working. And that doesn't mean that you should be chasing the marketplace necessarily, right? But to give an extreme example, if you were thinking, should I write $100 million period Western, right? Well, if you were doing that part of the job and tracking what's working, what's selling, you would see that there's not a big market for that, right? So yeah, I could write it, but if I do, I'm probably going to find less people that are going to respond to that material versus, something in the elevated sci-fi horror space. Again, that's not to say you shouldn't write what you're passionate about, but try to take what you're passionate about and point it in a direction that seems to be popular or seems to be in demand.
I agree. I think one of the biggest things that I see upcoming screenwriters is writing the wrong shit.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's like a cesspool, and it's like if I close my eyes, I see it. It's like a circle of upcoming writers swimming around in the circle. You know what I mean?
Why
and
would you want to see that when you close your eyes?
I just saw it.
It's disgusting.
No,
It
for
can't
real.
be undone.
For real. Like I'll give you an example. Like, and again, I don't mean this to be, you know, insulting or pejorative to writers. Of course, you know, a lot of my outreach when it's podcast, Twitter, whatever, is designed to help writers, to give some advice and, you know, helping people break in, because I know it's so hard.
Yeah.
But I will say, in all honesty, like if I'm going through the log lines of like, pick any screenplay contest, right? Even like the Nickel, which I think is, you know, fair to say is probably the most prestigious, but pick any of them. If I'm going through the log lines of a semifinalist or the finalist or whatever, maybe 1 out of 10, I think could actually get people interested if you were going to use that in turn to query, or if managers or whoever, you know, are going through those log lines trying to find some stuff to read. You know, if you win, great. I think people will read that, but short of that, maybe 1 out of 10 log lines seems interesting enough. And so that's not, I don't say that to like be, you know, pessimistic. I say that to be, you know, action oriented in terms of, okay, the next thing you write, don't just write the concept that seems good enough, right? Take the time, spend the extra few weeks noodling around with, you know, some different ideas and try to find the one, you know, do some testing, right, amongst your peers,
Right.
you know, whatever, right? If you're in a writer's group, that's great, you know, see what they're thinking. Try to pick the idea that's going to be in that top 10%. Of course, easier said than done, but
Yeah.
I think that's the mistake a lot of writers make, so that, you know, when you ultimately query, when you ultimately enter contests or whatever, you're essentially drawing dead in the water, right? Because I don't care how good your script is, if the log line isn't interesting,
Not even gonna get a read.
no one's going to read
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I agree. Another thing that how do you, it's the new year, right?
Well, not yet. Not quite. It's not quite the new year.
Well, when this comes out, it'll be the new year.
Yeah, well, whilst we're recording it, it's actually the end of the year.
Happy almost New Year, everybody.
It's actually the end of the year whilst we record it. It's not, we don't know when this is going to come out.
I bet you it won't be in 2 weeks, though.
Anyways, what is your question, Saeed?
We'll say Happy New Year, and if it comes out in December, we can just edit that out.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Screenwriters out there from Two Writers Talking Shit. What I was going to say is that it's a new year. And do you have any advice for writers who have been struggling last year, which is a lot of them that I talked to, and that tweet me, and it's like they haven't been making any necessarily traction. They've been entering contests and stuff like that. Do you have any advice for them to prepare themselves for success for the new year, or just, even if it's a notch up higher? Like, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I would say be honest with yourself about the last idea and the idea you're working with, right? So given what we were just talking about, where the bar is high, be real with yourself, right? Did that idea actually meet that threshold, right, of being, let's say, in the top 10% of log lines, not just in the ether, but like in the contests, right, in the query letters that reach someone's inbox? Are you writing just for yourself, or are you writing for the proper audience? And by proper audience, I don't actually mean the people at home, right? The proper audience for you to write toward is development executives in Hollywood, right?
Right.
We know what that crowd looks like. It's not a crowd of people in their 50s and 60s that run the industry, right? It's the people that work under them, that are in their late 20s to early 40s, politically, like they tend to lean left, they tend to have grown up in the 90s, 2000s, right? There's a sense of nostalgia there. Like, that's just an example, but what I mean to imply is that is your audience that you have to please. And so if you go back and honestly look at your last script, right, that, presumably for this group of people didn't achieve the results that you were hoping for, get real with yourself, right? What in there was designed to appeal to that crowd? And if you're struggling to find it, there you go, right? You were writing dead in the water. Doesn't matter how good your script was, it wasn't the right idea. And so what I would say to this group of people is, when you work on your next thing, right, focus more on that. And then also, I think a lot of these people are not working in the industry. And while it is possible to, be anywhere in the world and find success, your odds, of course, are better if you're in LA, right? And if you're in LA, your odds are, of course, better if you're working somewhere in the industry. And so I think a lot of writers make the mistake of not trying hard enough to get that job on set, to get that job working as an assistant for a producer, manager, agent, whatever, right? Like, inherently that's going to open doors for you. So I would at the very least consider that. If you're a writer who's a little bit further on in life, right, you're not in a position where you can be an assistant. I mean, that's still fine. You can still find success, but I think you need to take into account that, that's a big window, right? And so if you're not going to explore that window, you need to heavy up on other windows, right? So you need to be, trying to schedule lunches and drinks with people. You need to be, on screenwriter Twitter, trying to, slide into showrunners DMs, right? Like, whatever you can do to give you a leg up. And I think, look, stepping one step further back, I would have an honest conversation with yourself. Is this something that you have to do, right? I think we all know how hard it is to succeed in this business, especially as a writer. I think we could all be, have very successful careers, right, outside of this industry that are a lot easier to break into. It's not to discourage people, but I think you should have an honest conversation, right? Do I love this enough to give up the safe bet, right? Whatever career that is my opportunity cost, that I could probably, in all honesty, make a lot more money in the long run doing, right? Have more job security, et cetera. Do I love it enough to potentially sacrifice that to struggle? And if the answer is yes, then great, keep going. If the answer is I don't know, then, real talk, right? Less than 1% of writers actually make it, right? Like, if you go to screenwriter Reddit, which I rarely do because it's kind of a cesspool these days. Yeah. But there's, I think, 1.5 million people that are on that Reddit. Let's be conservative and say half of those people are actually writing, right? Okay, so that's 750,000 people, right? Yeah. How many people actually break into this industry every year as a writer? Yeah. Maybe 100, right? And so the odds are low. Again, it's not to discourage you, right? But that's where the bar is. No different than if you were an athlete trying to make it in, whatever professional league, right? Or if you're a musician trying to get signed by a major label, right? Yeah. Inherently, any of these entertainment industries, these talent-based industries, most people don't make it. So it's not enough to treat it as a hobby, right? You have to treat it as your life.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot a bit because I'm getting depressed hearing these numbers.
It's a reality, though.
So I'm really curious your thoughts on this because it's something that Saeed does and it's also something that I do, which is write with other people. So I'm not talking about a writing team that you've signed as a team. I'm talking about a solo client like Saeed who's like, oh, I wrote this script with somebody else who you don't rep, or I want to write a script with this person. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's
good question.
It's a very good question, and I see a lot of people do it. So yeah, it's a good topic. I think it's a little bit easier to accomplish, or let's say to achieve the results you're looking for on the feature side doing it than on the TV side. And the reason I say that is actually a little bit of a tangent, but I'll go off on the tangent and it'll all make sense. So the tangent is, as you're starting your career on the TV side, it is very unlikely that what you write will sell, right? I think you should try to write to sell because, again, the bar is high, right? Any given opening for a staff writer job, people are getting submitted hundreds of scripts. How do you stand out, right? Have a great logline, have a great concept. So that all ties together. But my point here is most of them will not sell. And so inherently it's going to be seen as a staffing sample, right? And an opportunity to be a great staffing sample, to get you in the room with producers and executives, et cetera. And if you're part of a writing team, that's great, right? That tracks. Oh, I read a script of 2 writers. They're both great. They're a writing team. Okay, I can consider them as a team for staffing. When you're not a team and you're kind of doing a one-off collab, it makes it harder to use that as a staffing sample because inherently they're not going to know who did what, right? Mm-hmm. On the feature side, that's less of a thing because early in your career, you're probably not going to go up for the major open writing assignments. You'll get there eventually, right? But you got to build to it. So early in your career on the feature side, it's more about, getting that water bottle tour, right? Ideally getting a spec set up and, getting in development with the producer and things like that. It's still a little bit hard, right? Because again, you can't use that as your calling card if it's a one-off collaboration in the same way that you can if you're a team or if it's a solo sample. But that being said, I think there's a little bit of a better chance of that script actually, getting set up somewhere on the feature side out of the gate, right, early in your career. And so for that reason, I think it's a little more viable to do. And so it's not to say that it can't be done. I just think the bar is inherently a little bit higher should be higher because there's a less of a chance of being able to use that as an effective sample. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've definitely experienced a lot of resistance to it from reps that I've had in the past and reps that I have currently. And it's interesting because my very first managers, when they signed me, I was like, oh, well, I have this girl I want to write with. And they were like, no. And what they told me was they were like, look, here's the thing about writing teams is that people will always assume the other person did all the work. So let's say you've got this sample that you wrote with your writing partner. No one wants to hire you off of that script because they're like, well, what if Delilah did all the work? You know what I mean? What if Delilah's the brains behind the operation and you're just, let's say, me, a pretty face, you know what I mean, and a gorgeous body. So anyways, I didn't listen to that. It's a long, complicated story. But I've had like a number of writing partners since then, and I'm always getting a lot of resistance, even if like, let's say we create an amazing product together, even if like, let's say there's a lot of like great reception to it, or, we're in development with that script, like there is still resistance to that partnership if it's not one of their own clients.
Yeah. And look, to be fair, I have had success. I have a couple clients that have done that and have had success doing that. I mean, I just, was fortunate enough to have a client who sold a show to a major network a couple weeks ago, and that was a one-off collaboration. So it is possible. I think the goal of that should be, we're writing this to sell, right? Knowing that it's probably not going to be that sample for that very reason, right? People are risk averse. I don't know. Did you actually do all the work, all that, et cetera. But if it's a good enough concept and you nail the execution, hell yeah, you can sell the thing.
Yeah, I agree. I do feel the hesitation though, for the same reasons you do, which is like people might be like, well, what the hell did you do in this part?
You've written scripts with so many other people.
Yeah.
Like how many would you say?
Maybe about 4 or 5, but the funny thing is like a couple of them didn't work because it just fell out with the person.
It's like, so hard to like find that partnership. That's
damn near the hard part.
That's the hardest part. Yeah,
it seems cool in the beginning.
Yeah, you think like, oh my god, this is it.
We're just gonna eat pizza and write. It's gonna be a ball.
It's gonna be amazing. It's like we're gonna be our own buddy comedy in real life. But it's my very first writing partnership completely destroyed our relationship. Damn. Like dead in the water. Then my second writing partnership, we weren't really friends first. We were like acquaintances, but I did grow to hate that person through the partnership. But now I'm like in my perfect soulmate, like writing partnership, but it's just hard to get there. And it was years and years of like experience with all the things that didn't work in a partnership to like be like, okay, this is what does work.
Like,
yeah. It's like dating.
It is like dating.
Yeah.
You figure out what you don't want and what isn't working. And then you can kind of whittle away at those partners, right? Oh, this person, that's not going to be a fit, right? And eventually you find that person who's the yin to your yang, and there you go. My advice is if you find that person, stick with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but also coming from music, I do feel like collaboration like is dope when it works because like for instance, Mel, you have a whole, Google Doc filled with shows that's your ideas. But sometimes when you link with somebody else and that blend makes something totally different than what you would have made or that other person would have made.
Yeah, Zach, we also thought there'd be a good opportunity while we have you on mic to let you know that we are also going to be working on a project together in the new year.
For sure. Hell yeah. All the time.
Amazing. It's also, to be fair, it's a
that
different...
wasn't an excited amazing.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. That was, wow.
He was like,
Saeed, we got to talk about this. No. I think it's a little bit different when you're a little bit further along in your career, right? Because the burden to use that script as the sample that people are, right? Like that goes, like Saeed, I mean, you, to your credit, already have great samples that people are reading. So in that sense, great, that's fine, right? Yeah. Whatever you do next, it can be with a collaborator because we can still have that solo sample that already exists to fall back on. Yeah. So I think once you have built out a bit of a portfolio, I think it creates less of a need, right, for the next thing to be that sample. And so therefore, I think you can collaborate more freely.
But for upcoming writers out there, make sure that you and the writer have clear wants and have discussed your goal with this script and this project, because that's where it gets mixed up, where it's like, like, look, my goal with this project is this. What's your goal with this project? My goal, because I think that's when it gets shaky, is when one person has one goal, you have another goal, and it just doesn't.
Well, I mean, it can even be really small things. Like, so before, like in the before times, I would write in person with my partner at the time, and it would literally be like, well, whose hands are going to go on the keyboard? You know what I mean? It's like, we couldn't even get to the big questions because it was like, well, I'm going to hold it. You know what I mean? But yeah, no, I think that's something that's really important to remember, like, especially if you do want to collaborate with someone, is to have those strong samples that are clearly reflective of your own voice as a writer. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, is not having that. Or also, it's like, this is something that Zack was speaking about earlier, is like, like, let's say, you're like, oh, I want to write this futuristic sci-fi Western, whatever, right? But it's like, where's your script that's like the you script? It's like, I think that another thing it needs to sort of reflect, you need to know what your log line as a writer is. Because 100%. If you don't know how to sell yourself, how is anyone else going to know how to sell yourself? Sell yourself? Sell you, not sell yourself.
No,
sell you.
Yeah.
But so your script should be reflective of that log line. So it's like, you have to kind of think of it as like, this is the me script. Even if your protagonist isn't exactly like you, they need to be enough like you that your future reps or anyone who reads it can be like, I'm reading this and I understand who this writer is. Yeah. I know what to do with them. I know what shows I can like put them on. I know like what producers to introduce them to.
Yeah. I'm going to say something that half the audience is going to roll their eyes at, but it's real.
Uh-oh, here it comes, guys.
The eye roll.
The eye roll moment. Reps and producers will try to brand you, right? Because if you think of it one step backwards, everyone's risk averse, right? When you're a producer, when you're an executive trying to hire someone for a job, you know that if you... Can we cuss on this podcast? Yeah. When you fuck up, you put your job on the line, you could get fired, right? So the goal is self-preservation. I can't get fired. If I can justify to my boss why I made this hire, so that even if it doesn't work out, I'm covered, right? That's the goal. And so therefore, you're oftentimes looking to hire someone who either, is one of one, right? This is the next big thing, or more likely someone who's already done whatever it is you're trying to hire them for, right? And so the goal then is to say, look, this person just wrote a script that's fucking awesome in whatever area, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're looking for. So I'm gonna hire this person, right? So I think the goal needs to be to, yes, of course, stay true to your voice, be authentic. Don't, if you're a comedy writer, don't try to, write that big, action, whatever, right? It's not gonna work, right? You really wanna have a good idea of what you are as a writer, who you are, I should say. But be cognizant that the person on the other side of the table is going to try to brand you, right? And of course, like once you get a foothold, then you as the talent, as a writer, you want to expand your brand, right? Okay, you knew me for this, and now I can move a little bit more in this direction, right? Like, okay, you signed me as a horror writer. The next thing I'm going to write is more in the sci-fi space, right? There's a kind of a conduit there, right? Like I'm going to expand out a little bit, but what isn't effective is when you write something that's a great sci-fi feature and then a manager reads it and they're like, oh great, you like sci-fi? Oh no, actually I want to be a half-hour comedy writer.
Yeah, no.
That happens to me frequently.
What?
And it's like, well, but what do you have that's in the half-hour comedy space then,
Yeah.
right? Because the jobs that I can put you up for off of this script are going to be in the feature sci-fi space. So there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
That happens more often. Like, it's funny because I know some people who like wrote a certain script to get in a contest in place, and then they're like, but I don't want to write sci-fi. And I'm like, damn, like, man. Yes. And when do you
What a transition.
No, but that's the that's the UCB way.
Yes, and
I was in improv for nowhere near
on Zoom.
on Zoom.
That's so sad.
Which no, but it was actually a fun experience.
Was it?
And it's funny because we're about to talk about staffing, but I feel like being an improv was great for staffing because it allowed me to get out of my head, right? And I used to be in UCB. If you're like, so like the first couple days, I would try to think of the fucking shit while I was going around the room, and you would die. You will drown if you try to do that.
Yeah.
And you just had to free up and just be like, all right, man, I'm just about whatever comes up.
Yeah.
And one. But in the room, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, you can kind of come prepared with like, you know, like when I was on Flatbush, I would, you know, I'd have like 3 pitches I have, but like, don't try to like shove those pitches. You know what I'm saying? It's like you have to be with the flow of the room.
Totally.
And be aware and be present. And so improv was a part of that. But on the idea of being staffed, we have upcoming writers. All of them want to get staffed on a television show. How do they get staffed? In 5 minutes.
Well, less because we have other questions.
This is why they pay me some of the bucks.
There we go. Let's go.
10% to be specific.
Yes.
So I think first and foremost, some of this is going to be a repeat of stuff we talked earlier, but just to, you know, have it coalesce here specifically to answer, how do I get staffed? Okay, first thing, on TV, live in LA, right? It is very unlikely at this point you're going to get staffed if you live elsewhere. For a minute, it was more viable when everything was over Zoom. I think a good percentage of writers' rooms are going back to being in person in 2023 and beyond. So you kind of have to be here. Maybe in New York, but even half the shows that film in New York, the rooms are still in LA, right?
Right.
So ideally, be here. Secondly, a decently high percentage of staff writer jobs, which is the bottom level of the staffing hierarchy, are given to people who are on that insider track, right? And so it's so important to have those connections with, if not the showrunner, with someone on the inside of any given show, right? And so that's where it really pays dividends to work in the industry. Even if you're working in, you know, freaking post-production, right, in TV, at least that gives you access to the showrunner, right, to, you know, the producer, et cetera, right? And you can then in turn leverage that connection to say, hey, yeah, I'm working as an editor, but I would really love to be a writer. You know, can you give me a freelance episode? Can you look at my script? Can you, you know, hire me as the writer's assistant if we get picked up for season 2, whatever, right? So I think working in the industry in any capacity is really helpful. You know, I think, first of all, getting a rep is more often than not a prerequisite, right, to getting staffed. And so unless you're getting promoted within a show, you know, that's kind of the exception, but short of that. And then the last piece of the puzzle that I think is really important and often effective is the fellowships, right? Saeed, you did the Nickelodeon fellowship. Yeah. You know, that was effective for you. It opened a lot of doors for you in the Viacom world, right? And, you know, a lot of the major studios put on these fellowships. The best percentage chance you have of getting staffed is directly coming out of one of those fellowships.
I agree.
I have, you know, thankfully I have multiple clients who had that path and found success and got staffed right away. I mean, it, you know, on average, it might take a couple years.
Yeah.
Even when you get an agent and get a manager, it might take, you know, 2 or 3 years to get that first room because it's so hyper competitive. And these days there are so few openings, even though there's a lot of TV shows, you know, mini rooms, smaller rooms, right? Smaller orders, all leads to like fewer jobs on each individual show. So it's really competitive. The best chance you will have is getting in the NBC lab, the CBS lab, the Nickelodeon lab, whatever it is, right? And then getting a job right out of that. So I would say definitely track those major fellowships and apply for them. Ideally, if you are doing that, if you're working in the industry and you're, you know, doing the contest route, it's at Queer, et cetera, to try to get that rep, one of those hopefully will come through for you, you know, but a lot of writers I talk with are doing 1 or 2 of those, right? But ideally you got to be doing it all at once.
I agree.
Because it is hyper competitive, but it is possible, right? Every year we see, a few dozen writers, right, get that major breakthrough, maybe 100 writers, get that breakthrough. So on the one hand, it's like, oh God, that's still a small percentage. On the other hand, it does work, right? So keep grinding. And I mean, of course, the last piece of the puzzle is write a new spec that's really good.
Facts.
I have a fun question.
Please.
What's a great holiday gift for your manager?
This is a loaded question.
This is a personal question.
This is the question that's going to get me in trouble.
This for her. She wants you to answer this for her managers. Hi, managers of Mel.
All right. I'm going to flip this around,
okay.
and I'm going to give you the dirt on like my gift giving process for clients and peers. One of two things: you can never go wrong getting someone something nice to drink, unless they don't drink. Then you can go wrong.
Yep.
And you can never go wrong getting someone something sweet to eat, unless they don't eat sweets.
That's a good one.
That's your advice.
Yeah. You can rarely go wrong with booze or chocolates. How about that? Yeah.
So once these upcoming writers sign with you, how much work should they be producing? Like if you're a television writer, how many pilots should they write in a year? If you're a feature writer, how many features should you write in a year? Or are you expecting them to produce?
It's a bit contextual, right? Because of course people are writing at different speeds and, have day jobs and other shit that's going on. So I'll say on average, a TV writer trying to make it roughly 2 to 3 pilots a year. Again, that's an average, right? So for some people it'll be 1, for some people it'll be more, but it shouldn't be 20, right? And it shouldn't be 1 pilot every 3 years.
Yeah.
You should always be writing. And asterisk by that, always be writing includes the writing process, right? So it's not it's not opening final draft every single day. I actually think that's a recipe for disaster, because that's a recipe to mediocrity. Because so much of what writing is the process around it, right? It's doing the research, it's doing the development, rewriting, outlining, right? All that stuff matters and will make your work better. So when you hear, you should be writing every day, doesn't literally mean you should be in final draft every day. It means you should be doing that process every day, right? So to circle back around to your question, I think if you're doing it right, that means you're not putting out 20 scripts a year, right? That means you're taking your time and putting out quality material. And so, I would say, 2 to 3 a year on the TV side is probably average. For some people, it'll be less or more. And on the feature side, 1 to 2 is probably average. I mean, look, there's a small percentage of writers that are naturally quicker, or, you're on some crazy intense project that's going to take you 2 years to write. And like, that's okay. I don't mean to say you should put that down, but I don't know if we're playing the law of averages. I would say 1 to 2 a year.
How do you know when a script is done?
It's never done.
Good.
It's never done. The question is, how do you know when it's 90% of the way there, right?
That's a good point.
Because the director's going to have notes, the studio's going to have notes, the actress is going to have notes. Like the bar is, I'll twist the answer a little bit away from the question, but the bar is higher now than it used to be. I think it used to be you could get a script like 70% of the way there.
Yeah.
And then producers would take the baton from you, right? And help you get it to the finish line. In a world where most material, at least on the feature side, to a degree on the TV side now as well, needs to be packaged before it'll be sold, that burden studios could package shit on their own if they wanted to, right? Like it'd be really easy for the head of any major studio to call the head of any major agency and say, give me the talent, right? They could do it in one day. They decide they didn't want to. So therefore that burden oftentimes falls on producers. Used to fall on agents, still kind of does, but I think more often than not, it's the producers that are running the show there, right? And so consequentially, the bar is higher because they don't have the bandwidth to develop like they used to, right? Let's say, I'm throwing out random numbers, but I'm probably not way off. Let's say 20 years ago, 70% of a producer's time was spent developing, right? Well, now it might be 30% because, they're packaging, they're doing other facets of the job that historically they didn't necessarily have to do before they could sell something, get something set up, right? And so therefore, a script has to be closer to the finish line before they'll engage. And so, I would say, when do you know when you're done writing? When you have a strong peer group around you that says, hey, I don't have any more major notes. This feels like it's in a good place. When you apply to contests and you start placing in those contests. You don't have to win, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of great scripts will never win a contest. That's fine. But if you're never placing in a contest, that script isn't ready, clearly, right? So I guess give you a holistic version of an answer, rely on your peer groups. And eventually when you have reps, you're going to want to rely on your reps.
Appreciate it, man. Zack Zucker, Bellevue, in the building.
About to leave the building.
About to leave the building. Drop in bombs. I was damn near about to rap like Ice Cube or something.
Why did you stop? What stopped you?
They got to pay for that. That's not on this.
Oh, okay. That'll be for our Patreon.
That's our Patreon.
That'll be on our Patreon. It'll say you will rap for you.
Zach, thank you for coming through. Also, where can these hungry writers find you?
Absolutely. I'm on Twitter for now. We'll see what happens with that hellhole. But you can feel free to email me. If you Google my name, you'll figure it out. And I'm always hungry to find really talented new writers. Again, I get a lot of shit sent my way, so I can't reply to everybody. But what I will promise is I will give everyone who reaches out to me a proper consideration.
That's very generous.
Get them log lines right.
Yeah.
Get them log lines.
Get your mind right.
Get your mind right. Mel.
Saeed.
Another good episode.
Another amazing episode. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you. You guys are killing it.
Yeah.
You know what we are.
The chemistry is palpable.
Okay.
All right, y'all.
Bye.
To the next episode. Bye.
See ya.
Two Writers Talking Shit is an original podcast created by Melanie Mars and Saeed Crumpler. Our producer is Kayla Guess. Our audio engineer is T. Kelly.
Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you damn well please. All we ask is that you subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and give us a glowing review.
If you're not going to give us 5 stars or any glowing reviews, then why even log on? Save your rants for an open mic.
If you have any questions for us, and I do mean any, you can email us at twowriterstalkingshit@gmail.com. That's the number 2, and then writerstalkingshit@gmail.com.
See you next episode.
Bye.